JavaScript. So up until this point, every piece of code we've seen so far has been running on the server. JavaScript is one of the ways you can get code to run on the client side. JavaScript is accepted by pretty much all the major browsers out there. Now there are some discrepancies between which browser runs which function and all that, but for the most part, JavaScript will work with all the major browsers. It's becoming so popular. There's new libraries almost every other day, and they just keep improving on these things. In fact, you can even create a Windows 8 application with nothing but JavaScript. So this is a very powerful language, and it's widely accepted too. So just an example of how much is actually out there. This is just a quick screenshot of some of the lists from Wikipedia of all the list of JavaScript libraries out there, all for various different purposes. You can manipulate the DOM, which is how elements are rendered into the browser. Things that are just based on just graphical visualizations, things for building applications, GUI-related things. There's a whole bunch of things out there that are just for JavaScript that you can use. And can you get rid of this mouse? It's messing things up. So how to add JavaScript to a page. You'll add a client-side tag. In this case, it's a script tag. You tell it where the source is at. In this case, the script that I'm showing you would be a JavaScript that I have in my solution. In this case, it would just be under content and scripts, and I have, in this case, I'm pulling in a Jquery library, just one of the many JavaScript libraries out there. And I have to tell it what type of a script it actually is. Once you include that, you now have access to every JavaScript method inside of that file, and you can use that on your page. Once we have a script on the page, this particular script is not related just to jQuery. This is a generic JavaScript library call here. This is an alert, just a simple way to show a message onto a screen. In my case, I'm using the classic Hello World example of how to show Hello World. I just put this onto the page itself. As soon as the page loads up, I see this message called, and I see Hello World. So it's not too hard to get JavaScript into a page. So let's have a little bit more complex of a page here. In this case, I have a div, and I have a label, and a text box, and I have a button that I want to do stuff with. When it renders, it looks like this. The idea with this one is I would like to show an alert and display whatever's in the text box. In order to do that, I'm going to need a method. In this case, I'm just calling it showMessage. When I call this one, I'm going to go find the text box. So I use this fun syntax of document.getElementById, and I give it the text box 1 ID. And then I just pull the value out of that and pass that into this alert method. So this will show in an alert whatever I have in that text box. And I believe in the previous one, oh, it's coming up further. When I go to run this one, you'll see that it actually breaks the page. It says that it can't find value because it can't find the object that's in here. So what actually happens with this one? Why is this thing null? If you remember from earlier, ASP.NET likes to mangle names. It makes sure that the IDs of all the controls are unique across the whole page. So the name of my control is not textbox1 or button 1. It's this weird looking thing with $signs all throughout it. So in order to get to this thing, or to this control, we actually need to use the client ID. And there's a couple ways that we can get to that one. So you could type it yourself if you want, but that could actually change. So we'll actually want to either access directly the client ID, or we can actually turn off this name mangling. We'll look at the turning off the name mangling first. We can give it a static ID. If you change the IDs of these things to be static, you now manage all of the IDs yourself, and it's your responsibility to make sure that none of the names conflict. Certainly possible. It's not that hard, especially if you only have a couple controls, to make sure that they're not the same name as another control. But because you're now managing that yourself, you're responsible for it. So it's possible that you'll end up with conflicts, and then your JavaScript will be working against the wrong control. The other way of doing this is actually using the client ID, which we showed you in one of the earlier lectures. So to turn off the name mangling for a control, we set this client ID mode to static. What that means is the ID is not going to change for this control. So our text box will now render a little bit differently. If you notice, when this thing renders, the name is still mangled, but the ID is now text box 1. So even though we've turned off name mangling, it's not an across-the-board thing. the name is how ASP.NET still ensures that the control is a unique name, but now you can actually use the ID with what you would expect it to be. So when we run our JavaScript, we can now see that if I put text in the text box and I push the button, it will now work. So what if we want to use the client ID? We go back to using this funny looking syntax of this less than %, equal sign, and we just pull out the value from our text box and we get the client ID. This syntax just lets you run server-side code, but have it drawn directly in the ASPX page. So now that we're getting our control, or our actual ID, when the page renders, my JavaScript now will look like this. It now has the full ID of that control. In this case, it's content placeholder 1, text box 1, but it's the same concept. It works, and we now see our alert with the proper control in there. Now we're going to switch into a focus into a specific JavaScript library. Again, there's many of these things out here. This one's just pretty easy to use, and it's widely accepted, and they keep changing things on it too, so it's pretty good to use. And actually, if you go to api.jquery.com, if you go to jqueryui.com, which is just a smaller branch of jQuery, they actually have some really nice examples of these things. Come on. If you notice, it changes up how some of these things look. You can have elements that drag around. You can have buttons that now look different. We'll dive into some of these controls just to see how they actually work. But I would highly suggest spending some time on that website because it has some really good examples of what's actually working. So, how to access an element with jQuery. You'll notice that there's lots of... Oh, the text got messed up there. Anyways, it has a funny looking syntax to it, but it's actually a lot easier to access elements in here. So we start with this $sign in front of everything. This is just how we're going to turn something into a jQuery object. And we pass it the ID of a control. So you put the $sign and then the name of it. So what should be showing here is the $sign and that go get the client ID script from earlier. And then we just get the value from it. That's what's behind the blank text here. There's a slight note with using jQuery. The value of a text box when we'll go to get it is no longer the .value property. Instead, we use a method that is .val. Just a little bit shorter to use. It's just now a method, not a property, or the equivalent of a property. Some advantage of this one, it's simple to use, and when you get an object out of this one, it's not a DOM element anymore, or just one of the HTML elements. It's now a jQuery object, so you have a lot more options in terms of what's actually what you can do to this object. For example, you can now use show and hide. Anybody have a guess as to what this does? It shows and hides the elements. But you can now actually do some animations on this too. You can use this to dynamically change the appearance of the document, but you can avoid having to go to the server on this one to redraw the entire page, because you're doing this all on the client side. You just show and hide a couple elements here and there just as is appropriate. Cool. So let's just say we have a set of controls, just some labels and some more labels, and they're all inside of a div. And in this case, I've given an ID as well. The method that we'll be showing on this one, it's a little bit moved off to the side, but you can still see what's happening here. Our show content, we're actually getting our content based off this same ID. In this case, the name is not mangled since it's not a server element, so I can access this with the name of this element just by using the straight up name. Once I get the element with this $sign syntax, I can then do content.show, and for hide, it's the same thing. I still go get the element, and then I say content.hide. Here's an awesome animation, shown, hidden. Oh, check out that animation. It's awesome. So we have this content 1, content 2, that whole section there. When you click show and hide, it's going to toggle, or it will show and hide that element. Toggle's a fun one. You can now start adding some animations in these too. In this case, I'm going to use a blind. I'll show you what that animation actually looks like in a bit with a better animation, not one in this PowerPoint. But we do the same concept here where we access our element, And instead of saying .show or .hide, we do .toggle. And we pass in an animation name if we want to use one here. You don't have to use an animation if you don't want to. And it actually, or depending on the animation that you use, it will fade up, it will slide across, it'll move around. There's a whole bunch of other things you can do to these things too, not just showing and hiding or toggling. This is just a quick screenshot of everything that's available from Jquery Ui. We have animate, clear queue, delay, dequeue, fade in, fade out, and there's a ton more with it too. So turn off the PowerPoint and then go back to that website. There we go. Just to show you a better animation of what's actually happening with this. So if we have our effects, hide with this blind, as you can see, it fades it in. Oh, look at how fancy that is. You can change these things out and say fold it. Now it folded up in a different way. Let's take a look at toggle since it can go back and forth. Same idea here. You show it, you hide it. Show, hide. There's a whole bunch of fun things in here. This is actually kind of like playing with the animations on a PowerPoint thing. Half expected it to be a star wipe in here, but not the case. This one slides in and out from the left and right. So there's lots of options you have. You can actually start animating content on here, but the best part is you don't have to actually do a post back to the server for that to happen. So, highly advise playing around on that site. Anyways, a couple more controls on this one. Something that I've been using a lot lately is a date picker. I found myself getting really annoyed going to websites that will open up a control and have you pick a handmade date picker thing, and it takes forever to load, and then when you actually select an element, it only half works. Using a library for something like this is one of the best options out there, because all you have to do to turn a text box into a date picker is just like show, hide, and toggle. You just say .date picker, and suddenly it's a date picker. It also does some validation on the controls, because if you use the date picker to pick a date, you now know that that is a valid date. You still have to do the validation on the server side with this one, but it's a lot easier to deal with. And users like the site a bit better too. So, Jquery Ui, it's not built into ASP.NET, and browsers don't assume that you're using it, and there's also a bunch of versions out there. So, in this case, what I'm using is actually a theme roller in junction with Jquery Ui. So earlier when I said I was including a script, I was using jQuery. Now this one's using Jquery Ui, but it's a customized one that includes this style sheet too. So to access or to get an element and then turn it into a date picker, I go find that element with the fun $ syntax, and then I just call it .date picker. Very simple, but actually looks kind of nice. All I had to do here was just click on the text box, and up pops the date picker. I get to pick around in there, find whatever date I want, and I can pick it. There we go. This is also very useful for making modal pop-ups. You guys know what a modal pop-up is, or you've seen pop-ups before, right? Basically, it's just a dialog. It looks like this. It can either be modal or non-modal, which means you can force the user to pick something, or you can have the control open and they can still work behind the scenes with it. So I have this content. In this case, I'm actually setting a title for it as well. When you set a title to it, you'll see that in the top left-hand section, it actually does have the title of the screen. And then the content will display in that lower section of this modal. And at this point, Andy is actually going to show you a demo of something we've put together. So we've taken the same project you guys have been working on, and we just styled it up a bit with some jQuery. Andy had some fun changing it up a bit. We weren't going to have you guys do this one, waste too much time figuring it out, so we're just going to walk you through the code and see what Andy's actually got for this.
There have been a few changes I made to this. We still have the student detail page in here, but it's no longer useful. I've actually stripped out all the logic on it. And one thing I've also changed up, before we had the grid view on here, I've actually swapped this out with a repeater control so I can actually more customize the layout on this. I've actually changed the item template on this, so it's using a header tag. Oh, sorry. I've added a. Okay, this is driving me nuts. All right. Unlike the grid view, the repeater actually has separate various templates to it. In this case, we have a header template, which I'm just setting to the opening div tag, a footer template, which is just a closing div tag, and the actual template for the items, it's going to be repeated inside of it. I've added a header element for H3, and I'm doing a couple of evals on it to get the first and last name of the student, and I've got a grid view inside of this. In order to actually populate the data inside the grid view, I've overridden the on data item data bound control, or wow. Inside that view, this thing's driving me nuts. It's going to show me nuts. Inside the repeater student's item data bound command, I actually extracted all the stuff that was inside of the student details page, brought it into here, and add a couple of checks in here to make sure I'm actually inside a list item as opposed to the header template or the footer templates. Then we go through and do some binding on the grid itself. But as a result of doing this, which we can see here in a second, I've also applied the accordion view to this. So instead of actually having to go multiple pages, you can just kind of click on everything and it just jumps around. As you can see, some of them don't actually have data in there, but one of the fancy things you can do with it. We've also added a date picker on this to make it a little easier to pick up your started dates and whatnot. As we jump through here, pick a date, and it jumps around. If we wanted to change something in here, I could actually go back into the students page. Actually, no, I'll jump into the master page instead so we could try this on a global site. Inside of our head tags here, you notice we have, for the most part, we've left this content placeholder empty. I'm going to add an additional script tag in here to try. Oh, jeez. Huh? And let's just see when we fancy up all the buttons on here. Okay. Now, the little syntax I've actually just given right here is shortcut in Jquery. This will actually is a special event function that will run once the page is actually completed loading on the client side. So anything you want to do in here after the page is loaded, you would just drop it in here. In this case, I'm going to try, let's just spruce up our buttons here. So I'll choose input.
Remember all the button controls, when they render as input.
Yes.
So what Andy's doing right now is just writing a query, or a Jquery query, to go find all of the buttons.
Button tags in HTML are either formed as input tags or as button tags. This little selector here is basically saying, give me all the input tags that have the type of submit. And then I'll just call button on it. And actually, because I can, I'm going to add in any A tags. I'll save this, save it. And if we refresh the page, that doesn't seem to work in here. I don't think that actually worked. Oh yeah, this one doesn't. Stop going to sleep on me. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to have worked. Yeah, Yeah, I'm running out of either. A little short demo.
Where is it actually doing the recording?
The accordion part is actually done inside the student's ASPX page. I used the similar function, and I just set div students and called accordion. Not much to it. Demo itself is a little small, but as Adam was showing you, there's various options you can actually do. I don't know what that is.
I guess one of the nice things about using a JavaScript library like Jquery is that it's very easy to I guess add some pretty cool effects to your website without really doing too much effort behind it, like showing and hiding. We were giving a demo just the other day to clients, and we had one of the screens open and close itself, and the clients actually moved on when all that we did was add a button with a small event to it. So it's not that hard to get too fancy without really doing too much effort.